Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Crew Philosopher podcast. I am your host of the Crew Philosophy here, and I have a special guest today, someone who I've been following her work for some time now, Kira Davis. I'm going to let her introduce herself to the audience. Kira, nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I also have been a fan of yours. I'm a fan of your Twitter account. And again, my name is Kira Davis. I am a freelance podcaster. I'm an opinion journalist. I'm an author. And I write about pop culture and politics from the conservative perspective. I have a popular podcast called Just Listen to Yourself with Kira Davis. And I do a bunch of stuff. I also have another podcast called A Very Merry Podcast, where my podcast partner and I just review cheesy Christmas Hallmark movies. So I do
Wow.
a little bit of everything.
See, I didn't know about the second podcast. Is that a more recent one, or?
Yeah, we do it. It's been seasonal, but now we're going all year. Yeah, we love Hallmark Christmas movies. And actually, we've moved over to Great American Family Channel because Hallmark has been getting a little bit woke. So we moved over to the other cheesy Christian channel that Candace Cameron left Hallmark for. So, but it's there's no politics. It's sort of our break from politics, and we just review those cheesy, horribly written Christmas movies that come on every year, but give us exactly what we expect, right? Exactly what we want, because in this modern era, it's like everything feels like it's upside down. So it's nice to have one thing that's just like, this is American tradition. It's cheesy as heck, but we love it.
So I stumbled on your podcast via your Twitter, of course, the Just Listen. And what I liked about your Just Listen to Yourself, is that the name of the podcast? Just Listen to Yourself?
Yeah. Yep, just listen to yourself.
So the episodes that I usually listen to, because you have some shorter ones, but I like listening to like the 45-minute, hour long ones, where you kind of take a topic and you really like dissect it, get into the nuance of, whatever the topic is. And I feel like that approach to most of these issues, if we're being honest, is the only way forward, left or right, from my vantage point, right? I feel like you turn on CNN, you turn on Fox News, whatever, and with that framework, you have, commercials, you have, at least 5-10 minute, spots that you can talk about things, and it leads to dishonest conversation. It leads to people not speaking in nuanced terms. And so I guess what I want to start with you is, given the current political climate, do you feel like in many ways that the traditional media format helped fan the flames of the political turmoil that we find ourselves in, America today, 2023?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure how old you are.
29.
Okay, so I'm quite a bit older than you. I'll be about 20 years older than you. So I can recall the birth of the 24-hour news cycle. And that was in 1990 or 91 when we invaded Iraq. And CNN was a news channel. It was 24 hours. Ted Turner, the billionaire Ted Turner, had just launched this thing a few years earlier. It was weird. It's like, what do we fill 24 hours of news with? And back then, we didn't have the same kind of ideas about left-wing media and right-wing media. So CNN was sort of the standard. And it was a good channel back then. It really was. Then we invaded Iraq, and people were starving for 24-hour coverage. And then we also had the O.J. Simpson trial, which was people were starving for 24-hour coverage, everything. And so what ended up happening was Those were two sensational events that drew people to their TVs, right? It was drama, it was war, it was battles, it was a popular football player, it was murder, it was all of these things. And the television industry began to respond. So that's how we got what we now know as the 24-hour cable network conglomerate. That's how we got all this. Everybody jumped on board. Well, 24 hours is a long time to fill with programming.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually you've got to start creating your news. You've got to start creating the panic, creating the drama. And so then we just started packaging these stories that were made for drama. And then hyper partisanship came in because there's drama there, right? Conflict sells. And so then we started selling opinion on these channels. When CNN first started, it really was just a reporting channel, but you can't report 24/7 on news. People aren't interested in just straight news. People want drama. So what you bring in the opinion people, you bring in the Lawrence O'Donnells and the Keith Obermans and just people who are going to capture the audience's attention. And that is what has shaped the news media in the last 30 years or so, 30 to 40 years. And so, yeah, absolutely, it's responsible for the decline in dialogue that we have these days, and also the lack of curiosity. They pitched themselves as sort of soup to nuts. We're covering everything. 24 hours of news. There's nothing you won't miss. But of course, that's not what happened at all. People are missing a lot of the story because the story is packaged to sell. And everyone needs to remember that, and this is the biggest danger of television news and radio news, is that news is just entertainment. It's not really there to inform you. It's just entertainment. And if you think that's not true, then why do they play ads during the news? They play ads because ads pay the companies, and the companies put on shows that people will be watching so that they can sell ad time to those people watching the TV. So yeah, it's just the entertainment cycle, and it has ruined dialogue.
The ironic part when I'm hearing, what you're saying is how, in order to kind of fill the 24-hour news cycle, you had to move from just, telling the news to kind of giving your opinion on the news.
Yeah.
I feel like we're in a full circle moment, because now I would pay money just to go to a place that just gave me data and information, and that's it. Like, no opinion on when they pass these bills. I would love to just get the bills, to get what is literally in the bill, and that's it. I don't want your analysis of the bill. I don't want to know what you think of Republicans who support it or Democrats who support it. Just give me the information. And I feel like I'm not the only one. You would think there'll be a huge market for a just facts and information channel or something, but maybe there isn't because it doesn't exist.
No, I think what you're pining for is local news. So you get that at the local level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I always tell people, like, that's where your best news is going to be, at the local level, because it's a smaller market, so they have to cater to the wider audience. So it's not leaning one way or the other typically. But the other thing is that there never really was that. And that's the other thing. Like, there never really was this golden age where it was unbiased news and you were just getting the straight story. What we had was an age where only one side got to control the narrative. And so it seemed that way because in the I guess the 60s or 70s, Democrats actually prepared a law that basically pushed conservatives out of television and media when it comes to the news and talk radio. And when Reagan came into office, he struck down that law. and it's called the Fair Use Act, or somebody will correct you. Somebody will write us, or somebody will tweet at me and correct me. Real Cure Davis, but he struck that down because what this act was doing was saying, it basically was saying that it's unfair for these competing views to be head to head on any kind of given program. When that law got lifted, sort of opened the broadcast sphere for guys like Rush Limbaugh. And he came in and sort of revolutionized talk radio and introduced people to the concept that there was another side. They just weren't getting their chance on TV. So a lot of people tell you the reason we lost the Vietnam War, well, it's not because we didn't have the power or the might to win the Vietnam War. We lost it on television. Well, Walter Cronkite was the anti-war, and he was reporting the war, and he was reporting it from the point of view of a guy who is like, this is a disaster. And it convinced the whole nation, because that was their only source of news, convinced the whole nation that we couldn't win, and the pressure mounted, and we eventually pulled out when we should have stayed and really finished the job. So media is there's never been a time when it's not been biased. There's just been a time when there's not been a counter reaction. So people always say that Fox News is sort of hypocritical for calling themselves fair and balanced, because they're quite obviously leaning to the right. But you have to understand that when Fox News came into being, there was only CNN and maybe MSNBC, maybe. When Fox News came along, they weren't fair and balanced because they were without bias. They were fair and balanced because they were presenting a balance to the scale in media, which we did not have before.
I think the you were referring to the fairness doctrine.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, which sounds a lot like the Fair Act. So, and look, I don't think you have to be unbiased. Like if you are a news organization and you have a perspective, I think that's fine to have it. I just think you have to be upfront with your audience about it. So don't claim that you are a neutral news organization. Say, hey, we are a liberal media bubble, or we are a conservative, think tank, whatever. And then you can kind of give your perspective on things. I think the problem comes where you're trying to portray yourself as like this objective news source, when clearly you have a bias and sometimes an outright rooting interest.
Most of the time, probably. I mean, I think we can, now that we have a few years behind us past 2020, and we've seen the release of the Twitter files, and we've seen how closely the government was working with big tech, how closely the government was working with big media, how the Biden administration, before they were the Biden administration, even was leaning on the media to cover up certain stories, right? To not report the Hunter Biden laptop story, to not report on certain things. So we know that government leans on, we know that this happens. We've seen the proof. And so what's the antidote for that? I'm not sure what the legal antidote for doing it is when it's your legal leaders that are doing it.
Yeah.
But the antidote for bad speech is always more speech. And so the more people talking, the better. It's funny, my stepmother recently asked me, she's liberal, and she said, well, what news sources should I go to that aren't biased? I go to the New York Times, and I find that to be pretty unbiased. And I was like, oh dear. Yeah. I was like, here's the thing, is that there is no such thing as unbiased news. The best you can do is know that the news you're getting is biased and go into it with that attitude. Yes, this is confirming my biases, but I'm signing on for this. Or later on, you can go, hey, I'm going to go look at an opposing news source to see how close I got this story straight. I think the people who are the real problem in these conversations are the people who think they're getting like objective the full story. Yeah. Yeah. They're the problems.
I also think you have to be informed, truly informed. You have to kind of dedicate a certain amount of time, and I think this is actually a real problem. Where if you're not someone who is genuinely interested in, news and politics, you don't really care about putting in the time to be properly informed. For example,
Right.
if a bill is passed, you can read the actual bill,
Yeah.
like the whole bill. It's going to take like a good hour and a half or maybe 2 hours of your night. And so most people are like, give me a summary or let me just go to, like you said, the New York Times or CNN. But built into that is the bias versus if you just reading the like a lot of the with the DeSantis don't say gay bill stuff, right? Where
Right.
just calling it that is biased to begin with. But when you read the legislation, you was like, well, I don't really see the big problem with this. I kind of agree with it a little bit. So I think that's Americans, and you get it. You have life to live. You have families. You don't really have time to dedicate to really like reading 2-3 hours of legislation or getting into the weeds of certain news stories. Right. Sometimes with the police shootings or things like that, and because we don't have that time, and I think these news organizations know we don't have that time. They don't feel any shame in kind of leaving things out, to get a desired result, so to speak.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, this is why on my show, when it comes to bills like that Florida bill, the parental rights and education bill,
proper name.
yeah, the proper name. I read the bills on the show, on my show. Just listen to yourself. I read the bills. Now, some of them you're right, they're like 70 pages, but oftentimes the first 50 are just the standard legalese that you have to put in every bill, or you actually don't have to put those things in every bill, but they are in every bill. And once you get to the meat of it, you can kind of skip ahead if you know what's just the legalese. But I don't leave people with excuses. I want everybody to at least have a button to press to send to somebody to be like, hey, I know you're not going to sit down and read this bill, but you can listen, and when you're in the car, you can listen to this chick read it, and she'll read the whole thing. And I read the whole Florida bill. I read the Georgia voter rights bill. I read the Texas voter rights bill. Like I read those things out loud on my podcast. Was it boring? Yes. But it's because I didn't want anyone to have an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. People are busy. And the news cycle and our politicians depend on people being too busy to dig into the truth of the situation. And unfortunately, that's just the world we live in. That's just how things are these days. I don't know that there's certainly no short-term fix. Best we can do, I think, is be people like you and I, putting out content, giving people as much information as possible to go find, making sure that bad ideas are being responded to in whatever ways we see fit or can manage, and giving people the option so that when they want to come and be informed, they have the option to do so.
So I think it's a perfect opportunity for me to kind of circle back to your podcast because it's one of the reasons why I enjoy so much. It is very hard to do a show solo. So kudos to you on that one, right? Like, and it'd be compelling to listen to somebody monologue, because if you don't have the right cadence, or I don't know, there's some podcasts I just can't listen to if it's just one person. I mean, maybe you and Dan Carlin and like Ben Shapiro, who I could listen to, just do like sit on the mic and listen to their podcast. So
I love Dan Carlin.
yeah.
I love Dan Carlin. I'm gonna tell you, hold that thought in your head, because I got a funny. Actually, I'll tell you my Ben Shapiro story after you're done.
No. You tell it now. You can tell it now. I remember my question. Yeah.
Because you're not as old as me. I would have to like write it down or something. No, well, I just wanted to tell the story about how far Ben Shapiro reaches. So I live in California. I live in Southern California, and I was in LA one day, and I was walking down the street that was filled with homeless people, because they almost all are. And I was walking to a parking garage and I noticed a homeless guy in the parking garage near my car. And I was like, oh man, this is great. And, he definitely was smoking a joint. He had a joint in his hand, and he had his whole setup out though. He was like chilling. And he had like a shopping cart and he had a radio, and his radio was on. He was smoking a joint. He was drinking a beer out of the shopping cart. Looked like he'd been wearing the same clothes for about 2 years, but just straight up chilling. And I walked by through his haze of weed. And what's he listening to on the radio? Ben Shapiro. He's listening to the Ben Shapiro show.
That's funny, man. Ben, look at it. Ben, see, I don't even remember how I discovered Ben Shapiro, but once I did, I was like, man, this guy is, and this was before I was like, I don't consider myself a conservative. I consider myself a anti-federalist, which puts me under the conservative umbrella. And once again, like he just grabbed me with his way. He was able to talk, and I could listen to him. I was like, wow, it's rare that I find these solo shows interesting. And so when I discovered your show, I was like, yeah, it's 3 now. It's Dan Carlin, Ben Shapiro, and Kira Davis. And I was listening. I was listening to your program, and you did one show recently about conservatives and how they should be very, very invested in education, and they're not. It was one of your longer ones I was listening to. And conservatives don't play the long game of things that they don't see of any importance. For example, they will play the long game, and it paid off for them when it came to abortion, right? They did the groundwork, and then the stars aligned, because you always need a little bit of luck with these things, right? The right people in the Supreme Court passed away. It's weird to say that, but it's kind of what happened. Obama tried to convince got her name, the female
Bader Ginsburg.
Yes, when he tried nudge her to go, she didn't want to go, and it came to bite them in the ass. And so Trump, to his credit, he put the right people involved, and Roe v. Wade was no longer the law of the land. It was a state's issue again. And so they will play the long game of things they care about, like abortion. But I don't understand why they don't see the importance of education. Because you made the obvious point on your podcast that everyone who goes to public education, public school, these are going to be your voters in the very, very near future. So how can you not see? And with the left, I think sees it perfectly, which is why they put all of this stuff in schools, because you get them young. You have and I read somewhere that most people kind of who they vote for their first 2 or 3 presidential elections is kind of how they vote for the rest of their life, which is wild. People don't really usually end up switching in their mid 30s or 40s. It's like you kind of vote how you vote, and then that's kind of it. And so, which makes the investment in the youth more important. Why don't conservatives understand that obvious point?
Well, one thing is leadership. Conservatives, it's a strange dichotomy. When you talk about the left and you talk about Democrats, they're pretty unified. They have the progressives have really taken over the Democrat Party, and that's their base now, and it's a pretty unified party. But the Republican Party isn't the conservative party. The Republican Party is made up of Republicans and conservatives. And Republicans are sort of center right, and conservatives are that hard right base. And there's tension between them. So conservatives like me, I call myself a conservative. Conservatives like me, sure, we do see the long game. We get it. That just like you described, the podcast episode I did, we have to plan out long term the way that the left has. But then there's the Republican class, or otherwise known as the establishment class, and they're just the people that are there for the job, right? And so they just look to the next election. And that's always the tension in either of these political parties. That's always the tension. Democrats have managed to pull their message together. The progressives have won that battle, so they're moving forward, but the conservatives still have not won the battle for the soul of the Republican Party. And I don't know if they ever will, or even if they ever should, if that makes sense. The tension is kind of what creates forward movement for conservatives. But I think you just have a whole class of leaders who are worried about the next election. They're not thinking down the road because they're selfish, because they're narcissists, because they got into the business and for whatever reasons they got in, ended up their notions were corrupted and money talks, and the swamp is a big deal. I don't think people understand what Donald Trump really walked into in 2016. And it wasn't just the left that was conspiring against him and working against him from the start. It was the right too in DC. It was Republicans too, not because he was so conservative or not conservative enough, but simply because he was an outsider, that he was an outside organism to this body that is finely tuned, and the immune system has to start working, got to push out that threat, right? That infection, because we have things running finely here. And honest to goodness, the Republicans do not have a long vision because they don't want one. The arrangement that is going on in DC works just fine for them. You brought up abortion, and I want to point out that abortion it's not a Republican issue. Abortion is a conservative issue. Abortion has only relatively recently been taken up by the Republican Party. Prior to the 90s, the Republicans were against abortion. Republicans were against pro-life causes. They did not want to bring the pro-lifers on board. They thought they were too conservative. They thought abortion was too political of a message. They thought the issue will never be won. We lost the issue with Roe v. Wade. They didn't want anything to do with the pro-life movement. It was the pro-life movement that started gaining traction in the Republican Party through the women that were activists. Phyllis Schlafly comes to mind, and other women who said, look, this is a women's issue. This is the future. And eventually convinced the Republican Party that there were votes in this issue. So there's always been a tenuous relationship between the pro-lifers and the Republican Party, even to this day. So the Republicans, they did not have the long game for Roe v. Wade. If anyone saw the long game, it was Democrats, right? RBG, who we just talked about, she said from the beginning, this thing is not going to hold up.
Yeah.
We're going to be back here talking about this because this is not based on sound constitutional judgment. So the liberals knew, and that's why they always fought. The Republicans had given up on it. Republicans do not play the long game. They do not have the heads for it. They're fine with the status quo. And that is why every primary season, you just see this ugly battle pop up in the Republican Party.
So one thing I wanted to ask you, though, and just for the listeners or the people watching right now, when you talked about how I can't say this woman's name to save my life. Ruth
RBG.
Yes, RBG. Yeah. How, she was saying, hey, this, the case that made abortion kind of the quote unquote the right to end abortion the rule of the land, even amongst people who are pro abortion, they will always say, and I heard this, that the reasoning in that case was like it was weird. It was like this is not going to hold up under scrutiny, and so everyone kind of knew, hey, this is not a resolved issue. Now, I have a theory that because Democrats also never really try to codify it via Congress either. And my theory is they needed it to be like a football, right? For election. So you want it to be unresolved so that you can have a rallying cry, every 4 years. Hey, they're coming for you, ladies. Right? Like that stuff happening. Conservatives, to your point, they probably viewed it as a losing issue, as you brought up. So, or an issue that isn't worth backing when we can kind of back other things. But I don't understand that logic, because you said that they just care about elections. Unless my memory is bad, I don't think conservatives have have won a presidential election popular vote since, what was it, like Bush or before Bush?
It might be Bush. Yeah, Bush 43.
Yeah. So if I'm looking at those numbers, I would have said, hey, something is wrong. Like, we're not going to keep winning via electoral map with the popular vote widening as much as it is. At some point, it gets so wide where it means all of these red states are now purple states. And so it would behoove you to kind of, hey, what's happening here? What do we need to do to craft a message that will make us, appealing to the American population? So even if they were only concerned about elections, I still don't see how they don't view the education part as part of the election part, like putting those two things together.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I said it in that episode. The proof is in the pudding. Look what the left has been doing. They've been educating our students in schools for 50 years now. And what are our students coming out as? Little tyrants, little maniacs, and they're voting like little maniacs too. Well, that is the result of a long education plan. You know, this is Pride Month now, and there are schools across the country with gay LGBTQ flags. They've replaced the American flag in the classroom. You know, I mean, it is crazy when the government, our own government, is replacing American flags with the pride flag. It's crazy, and it has become a religious symbol. And so we made a mistake pulling religion out of school. We really did. We made a mistake thinking that that was going to be a good compromise for all Americans. It seemed a logical compromise at the time, right? Okay, we all can't agree on this. This is public school. These are tax dollars. Might not work for me to take prayer out of school, but we're doing this. But as it turns out, it just created a vacuum. Here's what happens. I point this out in the episode. No matter what your religious views are or anything, the idea that we weren't going to have religion in school is provably false. We are going to have a religion in public schools. So the question, these people are going to turn to some kind of religion. They've turned to the religion of pride, religion of LGBT. So at some point we have to decide, well, which way is better to educate our kids? Which religion would be better? I'm just trying to get people to see, like, if this crazy religion can be in schools, maybe it's time to go back to the religion discussion. Maybe it's time to go back to the table. Be like, all right, well, if you can put this on the table, then I can put my Bible study on the table.
It's crazy you say that, because I'm thinking, when you said that it was a mistake to pull religion out of the school, at first I was thinking, I don't see what way there was around it, simply because of the, public schools is via tax dollars. And so if something is being supported by, by tax dollars, it would have to be representative of, of everybody, the Muslims, the Jews, I don't know if you could have a kind of a situation where, public schools were teaching Bible but remaining public. I don't see how those two things wouldn't that kind of fall in any type of challenge, via law.
Well, here's the thing. I would have said 5 years ago, 10 years ago, oh, that would be a rough case. But we've just replaced that religion with, there are Bibles in school, but they're LGBTQ Bibles. They're called things like This Book is Gay or This Is My Body. They're called books like that. right? There are religious symbols in school, but they're not crosses anymore. They're LGBT flags. They're some, gender identity movement
No, we
symbols.
agree on that point. So, like,
Yeah.
just look at you. I totally agree with your point that and I throw the LGBTQ, I throw the BLM, like, um, uh, I don't know what to call it yet, but it is a religion.
It's really, it's cult.
Yeah, it's a religion. But kind of that loophole is because it's not classified as a religion,
right?
It's allowed to kind of seep into the education system versus, Christianity, which is obviously identified as a religion. It has that block because of our separation between church and state and all of that stuff. And
this
so
is why I'll answer your question. So I think it is valuable to at least start kicking up the fuss and launching the lawsuits, because I'm not saying that it is going to win or would win or even necessarily should win. I do think the moral challenge should be made. I do think that we should start making it inconvenient for this pagan religion to replace this religion that was working really well for the nation, generally speaking. That's a generalized comment, obviously. So there's a lot of jerk Christians out there, but generally speaking, a nation that has pledged itself to, quote, Judeo-Christian values has been prosperous in human history. And so I'm just saying that I guess going back to this conversation about why don't Republicans look at the long game with education, we have to start making it difficult for the other side to operate freely in the space of education. We have to start making it difficult for them. We have to start making it costly so that maybe we won't get maybe I won't get my religion put back in school. To me, that's not the point. To me, what would be great is if the other side did what we did in the 80s and threw up their hands and goes, you know what, this isn't even worth it. We'll just take it out of school, forget about it. We'll do this on our own time. I think we need to start being more trouble. I think we need to start being fussier.
I agree.
We need to make it inconvenient for people to do the things. We can't change their minds. We can't change their hearts, but we can make it inconvenient for them to do stupid stuff.
And for the people watching and listening who don't, because you live in California, I live in New York, and just to give an example of what you're talking about, right? Like, so I live in New York City, to be more specific, and I work in the school system and on the college level, and it is normal, very normal, and you're probably going to agree with me on this, to get like letters from like deans and the head of the board of education at the start of like Pride Month and stuff, in support. As it, I'm like, how do you know I'm pro this? Like, it's so normal though. To your point, this would have been like unheard of 20 years ago. This is how quickly things change and how normal it becomes.
Will they send a letter about the glories and the blessings of the United States of America on July 4th? Are you going to get this is the day we celebrate our nation and the fine people who served it? You're not going to get one of those.
Yeah, and it's crazy how normal it becomes. And to your point, it's only about specific things that are these left-wing issues.
Yeah,
but you're not going to get a 4th of July. Congratulations. Let's celebrate America. The birth of America. Freedom and liberty. You're not going to get that. We don't really get anything for President's Day. Now, President's Day or Lincoln.
Maybe you get something for Juneteenth.
Well, yep, we get Juneteenth now. And so I do think
y'all didn't know what Juneteenth was until 2 years ago. Give me a break.
And I had talked about Juneteenth on my podcast before, and I was saying, I think I was too hard on Juneteenth at first because I saw what was happening, and Black people were pushing back against me, and I understand where they were coming from about, no, this is a good, this is important to us. This is a good thing.
Mhm.
What I was seeing was what they're going to do is they're going to use Juneteenth as a way to diminish the 4th of July. Like
Right. I've heard, yeah, a lot of people say that. Yeah.
it's going to be a divisive thing. The Juneteenth push, it's not going to be pure. It wasn't happening in a pure spirit. When Joe Biden made it a national holiday, it wasn't, this pure thing that he's doing because he thinks
Right.
we should. That it was a very calculated, political move that he did with the
Sure.
holiday, and because he did it, you won't be able to separate the holiday from the
The president. Yeah.
anti-American, exactly,
Yeah.
the anti-American sentiment, which I don't like because blacks weren't anti-America
Right.
for when we had it worse, like much worse.
Yeah.
There wasn't this hatred of America.
No, they were anti-slavery. They were anti being enslaved. But I know Harriet Tubman said, she took, famously went up to Canada, but she wanted to be in her home. She wanted to reside here. It wasn't like she was like, I'm escaping this country. This country was her home. She fully recognized it, and she fully believed that she had the right to enjoy it and be here. And yeah, another thing that has happened, right? This is education, right? This is how we educate. We used to educate people on, we educate people on the mistakes of America, but also everybody gets the same education base for what is great about America and how we've been able to move forward. And that is the basic education that any good countryman gets in any nation, right? You get an education based on the superiority of your nation everywhere in the world except here. Other countries rewrite their history books, right? Japan has rewritten the entire history of World War II for their students. I mean, everyone rewrites history except us, and there's nothing wrong with indoctrinating your students with patriotic pride. There is nothing wrong with it. That sounds like a subversive statement these days. That sounds like a controversial statement these days, but it only makes sense because when I'm raising my kid, I have a 21-year-old and a 15, almost 16-year-old now. And when I was raising them when they were 2 and 3 years old, I wasn't raising them for the next day, or I wasn't even raising them to the next birthday. I was raising them with 21 and 16 in mind, right? When I was being a total tyrant about bedtime, and when I was a young mom, bedtime was sacred. We never broke it. I don't care what you do. If you want to sit in there and scream, go ahead, scream. You're still going to scream in your bed. Like nobody is getting out of bed. I didn't do that because I thought that would be just because I thought that would be good for their sleep the next day or for going to school the next day. I did it because I wanted a 14-year-old that knew how to put themselves to bed at a decent time, which is what I got. So we have to look at education the same way, right? We're not educating to the next day, and we're not even educating to the next generation. We're educating to generations beyond that. We're educating to 10 years down the road when these kids are choosing majors. And then the college market changes based on what their notions are, what they want to do. And that is why we need to be thinking of the long game in education. We're not doing it electorally wise either. There is this huge split between the establishment and the base in the Republican Party. It's been here as long as I've called myself a Republican.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that the divide between kind of, Republicans and conservatives are Republicans are just focused on the next election versus conservatives are the ones that kind of, push these movements or have these core beliefs, via, pro-life, pro-American values, traditional values. And I want to ask you, uh, how would the conservative vision be laid out? Because when you look at the left, uh, when you think Democrat, you do think progressive now. As far as the progressive vision that it was kind of separate from the Democratic Party, they seem to have one where if you look at things that Democrats are pushing, even Joe Biden, Joe Biden's out here tweeting about LGBT, IA plus now, and
You don't know what any of that
yeah,
is.
he does. But the fact that the leader of their party is able to push things from the progressive platform kind of shows, to your point, that the progressive part of that party uh, is much closer to the microphone than the conservatives are in the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my question is like a two-parter, which is what would the conservative vision be? And the second part would be what can conservatives do to get closer to their microphone like the progressives were to the Democrats?
What would the conservative vision be for what?
Like their platform. Like, with progressive, they have, the trans movement, they have Black Lives Matter, they have like, what is that, for conservatives? Like, what is their platform?
Yeah, this is the problem. This is why education matters, right? When you educate an entire group of people to believe that they're supposed to be cared for from birth to death by the government, of course, that is the easy message that you're going to sell them when they turn into voters. We have the message of freedom. And guess what? Freedom doesn't sell itself. We thought it did, but it doesn't. And freedom's a hard message. Freedom is not a very sexy message because it involves self-responsibility, self-reliance. It involves consequences, right? It involves a certain measure of opportunity, but also making your own opportunity. And so it involves paying, it involves cost, right? No one wants to pay for anything these days. So it involves cost. So that is the problem with the message of freedom. I bring up Harriet Tubman a lot. I occasionally dipped my toe in the filmmaking world, and I did a short film a few years ago I got a grant to make a short film on Harriet Tubman. I did it's an action movie. It's not a documentary or anything. This is a reimagining of Harriet Tubman as an action hero, like a
I like that.
Yeah. Pam Grier. You can go look up Minty, Minty, Minty Harriet Tubman movie on YouTube. You can see it there. And anyways, I chose that story because I wanted to choose a story about the perils of choosing freedom. But I wanted to do it in an entertaining way. And that's how Harriet Tubman was. She was like, look,
man.
Cap's Cruel's cat is. That's all right. Of course, right in the middle of a podcast.
I know.
But she said, I would tell my people that I was taking up through the Underground Railroad. They would say, well, what are we going to see when we get to Canada? And I was like, nothing. You'll have nothing. You will have exactly the same thing as you did when you left. The shirt on your back, whatever you carry in that sack. There's no parade. There's no home for you. There's no, bed to lay your head in. You will have nothing, but you will have your freedom. And that's everything. So we have to raise a generation of people who believe freedom is more important than their comfort. And that's the message that we're trying to sell. So yeah, that is a hard message. This is why I'm harping so much on raising kids to be receptive to that message from the beginning, which is what we used to do. We had a generation of young men who willingly went to war in World War I and World War II because they believed in freedom more than they believed in their own comfort. The idea of there were young men who lied to get into the military to be available to fight. Young men who lied so they could be available to be drafted. Why? Because they had some death wish? Well, no, there was a different concept of what it meant to value your nation and fight for your family and what freedom cost, what it costs. So the mic, as far as the microphone for those messages, well, there's a lot of microphones around these days, and I think we're starting to see it. I think, if I could just be blunt, like a few more old people have to die before we get on board with this whole messaging thing. But you look again at what Democrats are doing and what liberals are doing. They're hiring TikTok influencers, social media influencers, and those people aren't a lot of money. You throw a couple of grand at some kid on TikTok with 1 million followers, then you've got a mouthpiece for brand new voters who are hitting 18 next year. You know, Republicans don't have a long game strategy like that. They assume that liberals own the space, but they do not. There are plenty of conservative influences out there. TikTok has a ton of conservative influencers that you've never heard of. It's not Tucker Carlson. It's not Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
It's some teenage girl in her bedroom, between lunch period and third period. And those kids are doing what the liberal kids are doing. They're doing it conservatively. They're getting millions of hits. You're just not in the right space to see it. I include myself as one of those people. But those people are out there. The Republicans could do what Obama did: throw money at them, go on their shows, humor them. Don't look down your nose at those people because that's new media or it's some silly fluff Snapchat show. Go to where the people are, throw a little money around. Look at all the money that Ronna McDaniel spent on Lululemon and haircuts and plastic surgery at the GOP. If you threw half that, throw $20 million, which is nothing in a presidential election cycle, throw $20 million at social media influencers. Give them your talking points and let them go nuts. Don't lean on them. Don't just give them their talking points and then walk away. It's a strategy that's working for the left. I believe it can work for the right, but it's just too many cranky people in charge.
Gotcha. So 10 minutes left, and I want to get to this last point because when we look at voting patterns, there's the obvious patterns, as regard to Black people and how they vote Democrat at over 90% clip is insane to me. But whatever, it's so high. We have that. You have the education divide, which is like if you have a college degree, you're more likely to vote for Democrats. If you don't have a college degree, you're more likely to vote Republican. We have the geographical divide as well, urbans, versus out the country. The one divide that no one talks about, which is the most apparent, is gender. And it cuts across race, it cuts across ethnicity, even geography. It is hard for me to understand the way women see the world, and I view myself as a very empathetic person. So I try to understand, what are women seeing that allows them to encourage a lot of the left-wing stuff, including the trans stuff, which I would think would be the one thing that would, but no, you see, and this is borne out by data, that men are more suspicious of the trans movement than women are.
Yeah.
Explain this to me. What is going on with that gender divide in politics?
I'm glad you asked. Well, Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this, actually. One of the things he'll tell you, he'll go into the brains. He's a scientist, not surgeon, neuroscientist. He goes into the brains of men and women. Well, women are more agreeable. Traditionally, we are more agreeable. That's actually a very feminine trait, to be agreeable. It's something that we need or have needed traditionally to survive in communal living, communal society. We don't go slay the lion, drag the bear home for food. We nurture, we raise the kids. So we have to okay, whatever comes home, whatever comes through that door, I'll deal with. If that's a bear, I'll deal with how to cook that up. If it's just a mouse, I got to deal with how to. Women are more agreeable because we're not confrontational. We're not aggressive physically or mentally or emotionally. Of course, these are generalizations. And so we're less likely to push back. This is why men have a much easier time. This is one of the reasons why there's a gender pay gap. I'm using air quotes. Men can go and ask for a raise. To them, that is a natural, a natural sort of evolution of working somewhere. You go, men are more aggressive about asking for their value. Women don't like to ask for raises. We don't like to negotiate. We don't like to do that stuff. And so women ask for raises at a much lower rate than men because we're more agreeable. So that's the thing that's going on with the trans thing is we're more agreeable. We don't want confrontation. And we want to be nurturing. And so we're looking at these people as people to be nurtured. This is why if you look around the world, when you see governments that are majority female, there's all kinds of wackadoodle stuff going on. That is just that is the long and the short of it. But here's the other thing. This is again why you need to educate. It's in the government's best interest to educate your citizens in the ways of production and value, being productive to society. Marriage was a big battle. Now I have gay friends and I recognize gay relationships and the government recognizes gay marriage. But the battle for gay marriage wasn't really about, well, do two people of the same sex have the right to call each other husband or wife? Really wasn't that at all. It was about defining a word that is actually very valuable to the structure of society, marriage, meaning one man, one woman, and a family, not because the word marriage is homophobic, but because the concept of it is necessary to have this building block. Marriage builds family. Those kids go on to build a family, parents, kids, so on and so forth. Once you start breaking up the family, the concept of traditional marriage, the concept of fatherhood being necessary, who steps in to take care of mom and kids? Government.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've raised an entire generation of people who aren't really getting married, or they're getting married later in life. They're not having a lot of kids. They're squeezing out one kid at age 40 or 45 instead of having large families and starting early. You have a lot of women who are going into their late 30s and 40s without a husband, without someone to care for them, without a partner to make a plan with. Who's their partner? The government. That's how they're going to vote. They're going to vote for their partner. That's why it's more likely that women like me who have been married long term are more likely to vote conservatively or for Republicans. We're not looking to government to be a partner. We're not looking to government to raise our kids. We don't want anything from government. But when you're a single woman and I want government to pay for my school. Yeah, I want government to cover my fertility treatments. Yeah, I want government to cover my birth control while I go out and do whatever I want. Yeah, of course, government should pay for my retirement and government should pay for my health care. All the things that I expect my husband to do for me, right? All the things my husband does do for me. This is what women are voting for. So this is why you have more women voting. This is why you have that divide. And I know that it's a long leap for a lot of people to make, but that is why the battle for marriage was so important. There was this slippery slope that has nothing to do, I mean, it does have to do with the moralistic value of it, but there's a logical and practical application for it. There's a reason why the government has interest in traditional marriage. When you
Mm-hmm.
start purposefully creating single women, and then by extension, what single men, and you've purposefully divided this relationship that has created such stability throughout the entirety of human history, you're going to get chaos, and you're going to get women voting to be taken care of because they don't have their partners to take care of them.
I'm fascinated to see where this ends up because you know, there were just like latest study or report that was released showing that amongst Gen Z, which is the generation after the millennials, the political gender divide is 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 growing more between young men and young women. And you also have kind of people saying now that they are less likely to, date somebody who has a different political viewpoint than they do. And so I wonder how this all settles itself. You have this growing divide in politics between young men and young women. You also have them saying, and this is more amongst young women, of course, who the politics of their partner matters a lot to them more so than it does to young men. A young guy, because most guys are probably more conservative than their partners anyway. If I had to guess, like, my father definitely
about politics.
Yeah, like, but just issues like my father is a lot more, he's not really with the whole LGBTQ stuff. My mom is more like, so I think that's probably true of most men who are in relationships still. Like, they're closer to the right, even if they're both liberal. The guy's probably more, not down with certain stuff. So I do wonder how this all squares itself away of with the Gen Zers who are like they're just going further and further apart. And there doesn't seem to be any incentive for there to be kind of a rejoining between the two. And to your point, if this is like by design, then there's really no hope for helping people partner with each other anymore.
Yeah, I don't think we're headed to a place where we're coming together. I mean, I like to open up my show to the idea that discussing and even monologuing our thoughts for an hour, it helps clear the air, it helps foster discussion. And I'm certainly available for anyone who wants to meet in the middle and have an honest and good faith discussion. But we are certainly not in that society. I think, and we're not headed that way anytime soon. And I think your observation is very astute. And one of the reasons why we see that divide getting bigger is because politics have become religion. So there was a time when you could have asked a young man, would you, like, let's say a young Christian man, would you marry a woman who didn't share your faith, a non-Christian woman? And most men would have answered, probably not. Faith is important to me. And, it's important in raising kids, and you got to be on the same page, yada, yada, yada. Well, now if you ask that question, you're going to get a lot of people who are like, yeah, whatever, we can get past that. But when it comes to their politics, they'll be like, oh, weird. No, because it has become their religion. Your whole life gets based on a vote that you cast. Now people are, as soon as somebody says, oh, she wrote something nice about Trump one time, then that person is basically labeled is labeled a Nazi. I mean, I was reading, I love Hollywood gossip. I love celebrity gossip. So I was reading one of my favorite gossip pages, and they were talking about Kyrie Irving. And now what did Kyrie Irving do except play basketball? He only did one thing, and that was say, I don't want to get this shot. I don't want to have to get this shot in order to play basketball. I'm not sure about it. That's the only thing he did. He's not done anything else. He hasn't kidnapped little kids. He hasn't eaten puppies, as far as I know. But this celebrity blog refers to him as a Nazi all the time. That's just the label they give him because he one time came out and said, I don't want to take this shot. That's because for people, politics is religion. So the way that Christians use, I'm thinking about the satanic panic in the 80s. Christians used to label anybody who was a little alternative as of the devil. Oh, you're a Satanist, you're from the devil. That's the way we are with politics now. We've just switched one God for another, one golden calf for another, because that certainly wasn't a good God to worship either. This false idea of who he is. So it is just going to, and now we're seeing alternative marketplaces set up, right? So liberals came in and took over all of the social media. Well, we've got conservative entities making their own social media, and the markets are splitting. Look at what's happening with Target and North Face and Bud Light. And now the market they're choosing their way, right? And the market is starting to split. And now the market's opening up for people who want to, we're traditional beer, or we're traditional clothing maker. I think that's where we're going. I think we're heading to a two-tier system, and whoever can master the flow of information the best will win.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on here. I'm telling you, if you guys don't listen to our podcast, I really do think you should listen to it. It's one of my favorite listens. You have way more episodes than I thought.
I have a lot.
I was like, 200 or something.
Yeah.
But it's really good. And like I said, I like listening to the long, ones. Do you have it like split where there's somehow like a paywall now, or
no?
So there's all like available for it.
It's available wherever you find your podcast. Go to Just Listen to Yourself. Just search Just Listen to Yourself with Kira Davis. It's on wherever you find your podcast. I don't have a video portion, and that is because I only do audio, and that is because it's highly edited. So you asked me, I can't believe you do an hour. I get that a lot. Like people can't believe you talk by yourself. You have no idea how much I cut. I'm not doing an hour. I'm doing 2 hours a lot of times. I'm rambling. I got to stop to burp. I got to yawn. A lot of times I forget where I was going with the point. So I have to stop and back up and refer to my notes. So it's so highly edited that I can't possibly do a video version of it. I mean, maybe if I had someone to edit video, but I'm not making cheese like that right now. So it is only audio right now. But if you go search that podcast, I've got episodes on everything, and there's always something in the news cycle to break down. And but I'm a big fan of talking. I talk to myself all day long. I talk to my dog all day long. I am never not talking. I talk to God. I'm always talking. So for me to sit down on the mic and talk to the people I imagine out there listening, I love it. I don't find it to be difficult at all. I find it difficult to edit myself, actually.
No, the editing is hard because I do my own editing. It is hard to edit. Reason number one for me is I don't like my own voice. So whenever I'll be like, I gotta listen to myself.
You gotta get used to that. Yeah, I've learned how to block it out. I've learned how to just it's just like white noise now. Yeah.
But no, definitely check out, her work. If you have any other plugs you want to give, Kira, feel free. Yeah, absolutely. Go.
Well, if you're curious about that Harriet Tubman movie, it's called Minty, Minty. That was actually her real Harriet Tubman's real name was Araminta Ross. Her whole family called her Minty. She renamed herself Harriet after her beloved mother, and then married into the Tubman name eventually. So Minty is how all of her friends and family knew her. So you can search that on YouTube. It's kind of fun. It's like 11 minutes. It's a short film. It's done in like the blaxploitation kind of style of movies. Something I was trying. Go to my Substack. I have my own Substack where I comment on issues of the day and what's going on. You can go to Substack and search my name, or justkiradavis.substack.com, and then follow me on Twitter. That's always a great way to stay caught up with me at Real Kira Davis. That's KIR.
All right, and for those of you, as usual, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Tell 2 friends about the show. I will be with you guys in a week's time, hopefully with my regular co-host Shannon, who's been, working.
I know the feeling.
But until then, guys, deuces.